Often, we think of community synonymously with human community. However, eco-theologian Thomas Berry takes issue with this understanding, because there is no such thing as human community without the earth and the soil, and the air and the water, and all the living forms. It is essential that humans see themselves as woven into this larger community. Then, one begins to understand that both fates, both the human fate and the earth's fate, are the same. They go into the future as a single, sacred community. When we live in discordance with the earth, do we too live in discordance with each other and within ourselves? Do the riches reaped from the earth justify its destruction? Whose future does this destruction affect? And what responsibility do we have to humbly steward our land?
Perhaps it would be useful to start with some fundamental principles that form what I call the mighty truths governing our approach to the world, to watersheds, and to the activities that belong to watersheds. There are 5 of them. What goes around comes around. Everything is connected. Everything is additive. Diversity equals stability, and we humans are in the loop. These 5 principles underpin everything.
Fiona Lauridsen and her family used to farm in Rosebud, Alberta. In 2003, they began an unexpected plight to secure their basic human right of water, demanding the accountability and responsibility of industry and government.
I first became aware of fracking when changes began happening in my water. It started with lots and lots of gas bubbles, white smoke coming out of my taps, and chemical irritation of my eyes and my skin. And that was how I began on the trail of trying to find out what had happened to the water at my farm.
I believe that my neighbour's water wells and that my water wells were suddenly inundated with methane because a company drove fractures into the aquifer in an attempt to release gas for commercial purpose. Make no mistake, the aquifer was not accidentally fractured. It was a conscious decision to go ahead with planned development. The community was never informed. Most of them still don't believe it. They just can't believe it. They wouldn't do that.
We think we need more technological progress, but what may be even more important is the ability to weigh its consequences.
It's my opinion that the industrial fractures being created today could well have adverse consequences for future generations that we, as the generation in power, are dealing with by using what I call the first law of problem solving. Denial. The other thing that you can do is that you can justify it, you can dilute it, and you can deflect the problem. And an example of this is we're told our economy would collapse and people will be unemployed. We have to keep fracking because then only a few rural folks might be inconvenienced and the rest of us, well, we'll all be much better off. If there really is a problem with groundwater, then we can use river water. And if there isn't a river, well, they're kind of stupid to live there, aren't they? You see, you can belittle and blame the messengers and the victims. They become the problem.
I think it's irresponsible antisocial behaviour on the part of oil and gas to do that. So I'm hoping this collective voice will say, no, we need you and this industry as a society, but we need you to be accountable and we need you to be responsible because you have the power to destroy us if you don't.
Industrial developers and governments are refusing to acknowledge the suffering caused by fracking and seem proud to claim that there have been no proven cases of groundwater contamination in Alberta. I don't think they they should be proud. I think they should be deeply ashamed. It's pretty obvious that contamination has occurred in Alberta and elsewhere. Apparently, we have naturally occurring man-made chemicals in our water. There was withheld data. There was ignored data. The review contained a questionable hypothesis full of mathematical wizardry about methane molecules being too big to rise above the pressure of so much water pouring down the water wells, pouring down the fractures. It was chock full of hydrogeological academic intimidation to make sure you understand the width and breadth and depth of your ignorance. But, in the end, the conclusion that they gave was founded on a database they refused to disclose. That's right.
I would just look at it and just be aghast, because my last hope was in science.
Yeah.
Because surely the scientists will look at this and come up with something. And then when I discovered these omissions and these deliberate errors and the deflections and all the scientific dancing going around it, that was the one that hurt me the most, because I actually had faith that the scientists would apply their analytical knowledge to the situation, and I hadn't. For some reason I believed it would trump politics, which of course it didn't, but that just shows you how hard I was hanging on to that hope and that naive belief that this would be fixed if only I could show them that a wrong had been done. And it's like, no, they have no intention of fixing it, ever.
My experience with the government process is not an isolated event. It's all too common. The list of disenfranchised landowners continues to grow as a regulatory system in place too often allows oil and gas companies to walk away with impunity from the families' lives who they devastate. There are contamination victims throughout this province who know all too well who our system protects. People who lose dearly don't forget how they were wronged. It may not seem like it at the time to industry, but it's a lose-lose situation. There is no secure future or responsible decision-making founded on avoidance of accountability. You are operating on land where we have made homes and worked hard to build dreams and raise families. I am always horrified and amazed by people who say to me, Fiona, you can't expect them to own up to what they've done. Then they'd have to take responsibility everywhere they've contaminated people's water, and they can't afford that. Well, I'm done shrugging my shoulders. I expect industry to take responsibility when they cause contamination and to earn public trust by doing so. I expect the government of Alberta to treat its citizens with more respect than I received. We need to decide as a society how we balance the cost versus the benefits.
If I do well, and as a result someone else does poorly, have we gained?
In an age when man has forgotten his origins and is blind to his most essential needs for survival, water, along with other resources, has become a victim of his indifference.
I wonder why now that someone can make some money from this, that water quality seems less important. Maybe they don't need that water, but I do.
Don Ruzika and his wife Marie farm near Killam, Alberta. Their farm is managed holistically, taking into consideration that every action has a reaction. Don and Marie welcome the opportunity to tell people about the lessons they have learned from nature and the importance of being stewards of the land.
Diversity, biodiversity, and stewardship are the three main areas that our farm focuses on in its goal of striving to be resilient. From 1983 to 1995, we farmed using the industrial model, growing grains and beef for the commodities market. This market was not forgiving and is not forgiving.
If you look at things as a business, our land base had some native prairie, it had some bush, it had some wetlands, and we thought, well, if we want to grow more grain, we can drain some wetlands, clear some of the bush, break up the native prairie, and we can grow more grain, because grain is a good way of making money. And industrial farming, it's about commodities. Beef is a commodity and grain is a commodity.
This makes me wonder if the things that are wrong with agriculture now all come from the human willingness to manipulate nature. It resulted in what I refer to as the dark side of stewardship, as well as a downward spiraling reduction in resilience. The message, objects in the mirror are closer than they appear, is one that I constantly ponder as issues surface regarding the effects that we humans have on nature and the decisions that we make. During our early years on the farm, I for one had been asking the question for far too long, what can I get away with? Now I ask, what does nature require of me here and now and in this place? Or another way of putting it, what are the gifts and the limits of nature?
Holistic management is about farming in harmony with nature, quality of life.
As farmers, we can try to have the land support our desired standard of living, or we can ask the land what standard of living it affords. Aldo Leopold, who speaks of a land ethic, which reflects the existence of an ecological conscience, which in turn reflects the conviction of individual responsibility for the health of the land. I found no better words of wisdom than these to help build a foundation for the future of our farm. Leopold once again emphasizes that we have to farm within the gifts and the limits of nature. Humans are part of the natural world. We depend on ecological systems for our survival, and we continuously impact the ecosystems in which we live, from the local to the global scale. When we took this holistic management course, Marie and I could see that there was a way out. And it was going to be an agrarian way, like Wendell talks about, farming the land. When we went back to the agrarian way, I felt so mentally good and so physically good that I said, bring it on. And people say, how do you do that? And I said, come with me. I said, I will show you that bluebird nest. I will show you a goose on one of our nesting boxes on our 10 dugouts. And you will see this goose sitting on 5 eggs, and she's been there for 30 or 35 days. The commitment that she's making, like these things that you've seen, when you see them in the flesh, I'll tell you. Meadowlarks disappeared from our farm in 1989. After an 11-year absence, they returned in 2000 because I started to manage our overgrazed pastures with a lot more care. Instead of grazing them like a golf course green, I started resting them. This allowed the root system to develop, the canopy to grow, and in turn created nesting habitat for meadowlarks and more productive pastures for our cattle. I've learned that when the farmer cares for nature, nature reciprocates. We view meadowlarks as a gift to our farm. When I look back, it took 10 years to bring the riparian area back to good health, 11 years to rebuild the habitat necessary to bring meadowlarks back, 6 years to go from 41 species of birds to 84 species, 9 years to go from 27% occupancy of our birdhouses to 97%. If I were to begin to accomplish all of this starting this year, would it take as long or longer? We don't know. Climate change is a wild card, and it appears to be leaving no one untouched. This has made me think that in our land management decisions, it's a good idea to err on the side of caution and start building resilience today, or maybe even yesterday.
There are some problems that cannot be fixed later on, no matter how much money or technological advancement.
I still get the Western Producer, I get Calhoun, I get all those farm magazines, and it's all there. You have to feed the world. But in some of the reading I'm doing, they talk about peak oil. Now, peak oil, 1 year it's here, 1 year it's here. So let's say that I believe that the easy oil, the easy pickings have been taken. So now we're getting into the very risky stuff, which bothers me because when we have leaks and problems, we start destroying our ecosystems, what we need for food, what we need for biodiversity. So sooner or later we're going to have to come to the reality that is that risky fossil fuel, is the cost too great, and do we have to get back to a way where maybe more people are going to have to get back on the land, roll up their sleeves and say, this is it. That's how we're going to feed the world. I really believe that's how we're going to feed the world.
What is safe? Who says it's so? Who determines it to be safe? And who accepts the risk? Basically
what they're saying is, we don't care about your generation. We're still having a high on prosperity. And they don't realize it's just about gone. And like I said in my talk, now we're getting into the high-risk stuff, and that's fracking. And how much do we want to play with your future?
Here's another fundamental question. How many of you have children? How many of you are contemplating having children in the future? How many of you associate the children of others, or think children are our future. If you remain unmoved at this point, were you a child in the past? Secure in the knowledge or notion that adults were operating with your best interests at heart. I hope I've achieved some level of solidarity amongst you on the subject of responsibility for future generations. To take on that responsibility, the grounded for watersheds and water, might start by contemplating what you would write in a letter to those that follow us. It could be to your grandchildren, or great-grandchildren, or the descendants of others. It's a letter to the future. Someone wise said the ultimate test of a man's conscience may be his willingness to sacrifice something today for future generations whose words of thanks will not be heard. We aren't looking for thanks. It's our responsibility to do this.
When we had our gate sign built, it was obvious to have a metal arc on it. It reminds us every time that we drive by it that our actions can either enhance nature or diminish it. We are also reminded of the importance of the spirit that this prairie nesting bird brings to our farm, and we never ever take it for granted.
I guess if you came to eat a meal with us during the growing season, about the only thing that wouldn't be from our farm on the table would be the salt and pepper and the milk products. And we always give thanks for that, because that is absolutely so special. That is a huge part of our quality of life.
Yeah.
And as we're eating that, we realize vividly the work that went into doing that, and how being conscious of how much the land can give, that we didn't take too much, and in many cases we're giving back. So that's pretty powerful for us.
I've also learned much from the spiritual traditions of Aboriginal peoples throughout the world. They celebrate our kinship with the rest of creation and seek to strengthen the sacredness of all creation. These hunter-gatherer cultures believe that the fate of the natural world and human life are fully intertwined. Man is not absolute ruler of the created world, but a collaborator with the Creator. They realized that in securing their sources of food, they understood their oneness with creation. They had a deep understanding that the communities were not only connected to other people, but they felt themselves a part of Mother Earth, which in turn developed a spiritual zeal for their environment. This resulted in a great peace and caring kindness for all living and growing things. The Amish differ from all other modern human beings in having the good sense to ask of any invention or innovation, what would this do to our community? They think of community as a whole, all the people and their land together. If the community is whole, then it is healthy. If they diminish or do damage to their environment, their relationship with God is diminished. Their culture not only calls them to worship together, but also calls them to work together, building barns, putting up feed, and being interdependent. In seeking to change our economic use of the world, we are seeking inescapably to change our lives. The outward harmony that we desire between our economy and the world depends finally upon an inward harmony between our own hearts and the originating spirit that is the life of all creatures. A spirit as near us as our flesh, and yet forever beyond the measures of this obsessively measuring age.
If we understand the Earth's fate and the human fate as the same, going into the future together, then we see the finiteness of our Earth not as our limitation, but as our shared responsibility, our common ground, our common language, our common work, our common place. A part of this great community, we may walk joyfully in our calling to responsibly steward the good land.